masterful communicators understand that they're not only responsible for the words that come out of their mouth, but they're also responsible for how that lands in the lap of the other party.
Mm.
So, to your earlier point about learning the different communication styles and the different environments you've been in, and to what Chris just said about evolving, the key is to always keep in mind, and even what he talked about with like forgetting stuff, like when you're speaking emotionally, once you take full responsibility of how your words land in the lap of the other party, you'll be a lot more careful about your words. And don't miss the point he made about slowing the conversation down. Happy Wednesday, my winners and goal getters. How you doing? Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in to the Getting the Win show. I am your host, Melissa Thomas, and this interview is going to be a two-parter. All right, so this week you're getting part one of my interview with Chris Nunez. He is an author on the way. He has a book coming out, and we'll be talking about his Trifecta Mindset brand, what we can expect coming up with the book. And we get into some deep conversation this week about the power of communication. This is going to be important in terms of beating procrastination too, because there are times when we'll be struggling with something and it's difficult to solve something that you don't have words to express. So we get very deep into the importance of communication this week. We do talk about his Trifecta Mindset brand, and we get into Chris Nunez's backstory here. So tune in and enjoy the interview. As promised, everybody, I have the one and only Christopher Nunez with me. Chris, how's it going?
It's going really well. Thank you for having me, Melissa. I really appreciate it.
No problem. So you have the Trifecta Mindset brand. Like, I've been following you on Instagram, and for those who haven't been following Chris yet, like, make sure to go follow him. Very prolific. You have a lot of content up there. So let's start there. Like, talk about the meaning behind the Trifecta Mindset and what you want people to know most about it.
Absolutely. And what Trifecta Mindset is at its core, it actually stands for faith, finances, and health. So
Okay.
it's a mindset that I came up with initially way before I knew it would be a brand, way before I knew I would be a speaker, way before anything. I was at a rock bottom part in life, maybe about 4 years ago, 2019. And I was willingly sleeping in my car because I just had
Wow.
enough of enough. And that was the only thing I owned. And at that moment in life, I literally asked myself, what is something that I can literally do and focus on to just completely change my life forever? To stop being a victim of the things that I've caused myself, circumstances that I choose to see out a certain way. And I came up with those three things. I was like, well, if I focus on my faith, my morale will certainly be intact. My health, I mean, I'll be vibrating it the way I need to be. And I definitely needed to fix my finances, right? And as this started to blossom, I started to just literally I gave myself a non negotiable. No matter what I do within my life, these three things will be at the forefront, period. So what happened was, as this started to portray and started to kind of reflect on how I was living, I began writing about it. I began
Mm,
writing about these different things I was learning because I began pushing myself. I started opening the Bible, right? I started working out a little bit more. I started caring about like my cellular health, not just not just a six pack and being these. I started to think about these things, my bone density, my cholesterol level, right? And then I kind of took it the same way to my finances, not just making money, keeping money, right? Because we can make it, but how do we keep it, right?
that
How do we
part.
learn it? How do we grow with it? And that's and its core what Trifecta Mindset is, right? Years later, it blossomed into a complete book that I wrote, which is a self-help motivational book that should be releasing within the next couple of months. And the brand itself, I tied it to anything inspirational from myself,
Mm,
from others, other that I've been inspired by, whether it be music, sports. Which, if you go to my page, you'll see that there's a lot of collection of everyone that I feel inspired by, that I feel has a message to share. Because if you
yep.
really think about it, we're all connected in the name of inspiration, some way, somehow. So I wanted to create a thought process, a brand, something that represented that, because I felt that, and when it came to motivation and inspiration, there was really nothing that we could really follow. It was just something you could take from this person, something you could take from that person, filter it into yourself, right, and kind of go from there. So as I began that journey, God was like, well, son, this is what you're going to be doing. And years later, as I became, I surrendered, I gave my life to God, right? I began just moving with whatever He told me to do and move with. And that's what the brand became in a nutshell.
That's beautiful. And isn't it awesome that when you start to work on one domino, like it falls and then all the others start to fall into place. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
you started focusing on your faith, and that kind of changed the way you saw your body. And then once you
Yeah.
fixed your body, you got more energy and you were able to focus on your finances. And
Hmm.
then like everything else started to fall into place. I love that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
that's
So,
literally what the book is kind of what I teach you to do. So they kind of become to where I push you to 120%, and they
hmm
start to intertwine one off of each other, right? Because naturally, I've been an athlete my entire life. So health was pretty not as easy to do internally, but externally, it wasn't so hard. I was always used to running, shooting, things like that, right? Shooting jump shots before school, running, running the steps in my building. So when I really started to put the whole cellular health to it, again, the domino effect started happening, right? But because I had God in my life, now those things that I might have been a little bit vain about, let's be honest, extremely vain about, started to deplete, right? Also, the way I saw my money, and they kind of all just, it became a whole circle domino effect. Absolutely. It's amazing what you uncover when you just go after something and
hmm
allow life to take its course when you have that type of non negotiable.
Right. And talk a little bit more about that. Go deeper into your non-negotiables because normally, like the folks we follow, right? Like you and I, we follow ET, we
Yeah.
follow some of the other folks that are within that ecosystem. Our mutual friend Eva, shout out to
Yes, yes.
Eva.
Shout out to Eva. Absolutely. The
Yeah, we
financial
just had
guru.
her. Right, man.
Yeah.
Like that's the credit lady, man. Like she's
Yes,
dope.
yes.
But talk about the non-negotiables that you set, especially in that sort of sequence, if you will. So, like we said, you started with the faith, then it went over to your health, and then it went over to your finances. What non-negotiables did you set at the time, like during your transformation, and
Hmm.
then what non-negotiables do you still live by now? And are they the same, like during your transformation and now?
Absolutely. Well, they've grown, right? What I like to say is they more evolved, right? Not
Right.
necessarily changed. They started from one thing, evolved into who I am today. The
hmm
first non-negotiable I went with was my morale system completely.
hmm
I've suffered through a lot of things. I've overcome a lot of things, but there was that residue that we carry with us that kind of portrays into who we become if we don't address certain things and
hmm
traumas that we've experienced in life. So my biggest thing was manipulating. When it came to dating, when it came to not expressing my actual feelings, because that's what I learned was at the core of who I really was. I was doing everything because I didn't want to talk about my actual life, my story, all the traumas I've overcome. So it's much easier to paint a different picture, right? And when you're so hurt in a place, you don't even realize what you're actually even doing because it's actually coming from a good place. That's the weird thing. You think it's coming from a good place until you actually grow and you look back and realize, like, well, no, that wasn't the best thing to do. That's not the way you should be. You need to start being vulnerable about who you are and where you are. And that was the first step, vulnerable. I allowed
Yeah.
myself to
Oh,
be vulnerable. I
that's
allowed
good.
God to start working within me. So the first thing I said was, I am never going to lie again. If I do, I'm going to be honest about what I just said. And I'm going to actually address within myself and with God what caused me to even say that. What caused
hmm
me to, step back and not share my feelings, right? So that initial little change allowed myself to forgive myself and allow God to work within me from there. Because that was really the biggest thing. I always had a sense of God within me, but I never allowed Him to allow me to forgive myself for everything I've caused to others.
hmm
And as we go deeper into my actual life story, it'll kind of piece together how these things blossomed and why they blossomed into what they became. But that was literally the first thing because at the root of all the emotional problems I had after the circumstances I was dealt with, right? That's one thing we don't really talk about. There's things
Right.
that we deal with, circumstances that has nothing to do with you, that's fine. How you choose to deal with them after, that's all you. That's all mirror talk. This is all shadow work, right? This is all like you have to really realize where did I choose to do the things that I did based on the circumstances I was dealt? Because I had a choice. We all
That
have a choice. And that was really the first initial step that started to blossom into everything else. And if anything, I could tell anyone who's listening, um, when you want to make any type of initial emotional, spiritual change, allow yourself to be forgiven. It
That
seems so
part.
simple, but it's, all these other things won't take effect if you don't take that initial step first. A lot of us don't feel like we can get close to God because we're not worthy of it. And I was definitely that person.
Yeah, I'm glad because I was gonna touch on that too. That's very important.
Yes.
In terms of, you who are watching, if you're a recovering procrastinator and you're kicking yourself for the promises you don't keep to yourself, like it's important to allow yourself some grace.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned in the previous interview, I want to say with Jessica Holly, like get right back up and get right back to it.
Yes.
Your recovery journey, like it's okay. Dust yourself off, get right back up and get right back to it. You know what I
Absolutely.
mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the key to everything because I mean we all have our days. I have my moments still. I have things that I'm still trying to overcome. What I don't do, which I used to do before, was sit in them, wallow in them. You build certain things around how you know yourself emotionally, which I think is so key to allow yourself to kind of just get right back up or give yourself that little moment of however you're feeling and to right back to it.
Yeah, very important.
Hmm.
So as y'all can hear, like Chris is very articulate. he's he's a
Thank
speaker,
you.
like dude, he's no stranger to the power of words. So I
Yes.
wanted to talk with you about that, Chris. Like you are a student of the power of communication.
Hmm.
So like I would love for you to talk about that with the audience. Like why is that so important to you and what are the things you're using to continue to strengthen your communication?
Oh, that's actually a great question, and it takes me back to what I thought I missed my calling in life was. I was a former
Mhm.
athlete, standout athlete. Like I was traveling from 7, 8 years old, known in my neighborhood as like the golden child, right? And I played a position on the court, which was point guard. Which those
Mhm.
who are not
Mhm.
familiar with basketball is the one who continuously has to talk. The one person that has to talk, right? One that has to talk to the coach. You got to call out the plays. We're the ones holding the player only meetings, right? Never realized because over time I thought that's what I had missed, which then in my 20s turned into just all the other choices I decided to make, right? Um, I learned over time as I grew that God was kind of building that within me all along, right? Which led me to today. So when I started to realize at this moment in 2019 that no matter what I'd done in life outside of basketball, it always had to do with communicating. I worked in bartending. I worked in
Mhm.
pharmaceutical sales. I worked in phone sales. I worked in medical insurance sales. Anything that had to do with talking to people, right? In any kind of which way, I felt comfortable in. But I didn't realize these things because you're so hurt. So I'm just taking jobs that feel good. Oh, this pays good. Oh, I could do this. I'll do it. Right? You kind of have this confidence. You don't even know where the confidence is coming from. So before all this, though, I actually lived in Dominican Republic from 4 to 6 years old. Had a little bit of troubles with my mom, so on and so forth. So I went to live there, and I completely forgot how to speak English.
Wow.
Completely. I came back first grade, did not know a lick of English. Even I like to joke about it. My brothers do. I sounded almost like Scarface. If you ever seen that movie,
Nice.
when I talked English, that's how I sounded. So I made it a point from that early on to learn how to actually speak at a certain rate, in a certain way. Started to read. Started to like really. It started as a defense mechanism. Whereas like
Mm,
it started as you're not gonna laugh while I read, which people used to do, and it turned
yeah,
into it turned into like all right, well I'm gonna like read everything I can get my hands on, right?
that part.
And then it turned into I would write poetry in the back of class. The substitute teacher would come into class, right? Some people would throw papers, some hang out with their friends, some drew. I would actually just find myself just writing words that rhyme to just practice this, right? But to answer your question, the art of communication for me is literally what separates us all in anything that we're trying to do or accomplish.
That's true.
It literally is what you're trying to actually say. And
Hmm.
it goes as deep as from parenting, marriage, your career, what you feel called in your heart to do. right? There's so many superstars out there that are not paying attention to how they actually articulate themselves and what they're trying to say. That if they focused a little bit more on that, they would be way more further along in what it is they're trying to actually do, right? So it became important for me when I made this change in 2019 to really harness this, because I had three different styles of communicating. I come from three, right? So I come from Queens, New York City, projects, raised in a certain environment, listening to Mobb Deep, Tim's Unlaced.
Bruh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the
Way
environment that I
back.
come from, right? So there's a certain way you need, not that that's the thing too, is we think a lot when we need to learn how to communicate in different spaces and places, that we allow ourselves to feel like maybe there's a disingenuous factor to it. And there
Mm.
really isn't. There really isn't. There needs to be spaces and places where you need to learn and practice how to communicate what you're trying to actually say. Because if I'm speaking with some of my friends from this environment, I'm trying to inspire them in a certain way, it's not going to sound too much like this,
Right.
right? I'm going to throw it in there for them to kind of blossom the mind as they did for me. But there's certain things in the way I'm going to speak to you that's going to allow you to kind of really zero in on what I'm trying to say to you. Same thing
Right.
when I was bartending, different kind of communication, quick, fast, lights is on, it's blinking. We need to talk in 2, 3 seconds. Sometimes I just need you to read my lips. So I got to,
That's it.
right? Fast forward to pharmaceutical sales. I'm on the phone 2, 3 hours. For the whole first hour and a half, you're trying to figure out if I'm even smart enough to have a conversation with you. So, right? So I took all these things. I was like, wait a minute. Communication is really everything. And,
Hmm.
and I really can't tell you where it came from. I can only give it to God, right? That kind of put what I like to call these downloads from the universe and told me, like, Chris, if you feel it in your heart that you could communicate with anyone. I walk into Starbucks, I find myself just talking to people. When I was a kid on the train, my mom used to be mad because I would just start conversations with just anybody, right? So I
Oh,
realized it was a big part of me and myself. And I made it like a really, really deliberate choice to be like, listen, the way I speak, how I'm going to speak, being intentional with every single word that comes out of my mouth is just as important as the story I'm going to tell that I hope inspires someone. So what I continuously do now is read. I
hmm,
read in ways that, one, and I think we actually spoke about this a few times, where I would practice reading and articulating myself in ways that felt comfortable to me,
hmm.
right? Talking about sports, which is, I mean, basketball is everything to me. Talking about hip hop music, which I love. Looking into different forms of poetry, right? And when you do this, it's almost like these different words and ways to speak start to kind of just like seep into the back of your mind, that when you find yourself speaking to someone, it just comes out in a way and you're just like, wait a minute, what did I even just say right there? You hang up the phone or they were speaking to a friend or something. It's
Like
like,
that was good.
I don't even know where that came from. So I would encourage anyone that if they feel they're either struggling with way to communicate, looking to grow in a way that they would choose to how to communicate, it's just simply two things. Confidence. Confidence is everything. It's just
Hmm.
two things. Confidence. I can't express to you enough how much there's so many thoughts and things that we all have in our mind, and sometimes we just don't muster up the confidence to say it.
True.
When you say it, then you begin to even work on it, and you might say it in a way that you're just like, I didn't like the way I actually said that. Let me
Right.
change that word. I'm not excited. I'm flabbergasted.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Little things like that. So as I then began writing, that really started to come out of me in a almost like in a poetic way. So I just kind of work on this daily, deliberately with everyone, with whoever I communicate with in any which way. Second thing is anytime you speak to someone, I don't care if you're in a supermarket, Dunkin' Donuts, it don't matter. When's the last time you looked someone in the eyes and told them thank you?
That.
Yeah. Eye communication. It's gonna actually build that confidence for you to speak the way you want to speak. So it's literally just those two things. Confidence, look people in the eye. And I guarantee you, everything that's in your mind, because you can't lie when you look somebody dead in the eyes. It's like we're talking soul to soul now. I could talk, and
Mm-hmm.
we could be here, we could be there, and it's easy for you to kind of think of what you're trying to say. But you look someone dead in the eye when you're having a conversation and you're confident about it, you'll be amazed at the things that come out of you.
That's a
I'm a firm
good,
believer in that.
I like that. That's really good. Looking people in the eye as you're
Yeah.
talking. We
And
don't.
no matter what you do.
Yeah, like in this day and age, we don't. Like
Yeah.
everybody's on their phone because of that discomfort. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's the avoidance of looking somebody in the eye because it is awkward. And I think that does come from, I mean, even if you think about public speaking, the majority of the folks who have a fear of public speaking, it comes from what you were talking about, the reading and being laughed at. It literally
Yes.
started there. Like it
Mm-hmm.
literally started from that. Nobody wants to stand up on a stage and freeze and then get laughed at
Oh,
because it
I've
already
been.
happened to them. It already happened
Mm-hmm.
to them in the classroom and they don't want to
Yes.
repeat that. So, for those listening, if this is something that you are struggling with, maybe this is what you're procrastinating on. Maybe you're called to
Yes.
speak. You know what I mean? Maybe you're called to speak and this is the one reason why you don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
What Chris just proposed in terms of practicing looking people in the eye as they're talking, that alone can be the game changer. Because when you're on a stage, that's your only option. You're
Yeah.
like eyeballs are on you, and you have to get used to looking into them while you're
Mm-hmm.
talking. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Looking into them and not losing track of what you're saying.
Yes.
So that's a great idea. I love that you said that. And going back to what you mentioned with the way God really blessed you, like he made you a communication chameleon because having to relearn English,
Yes.
one, being immersed in the Spanish environment, really, that's one, going to the DR and being fully immersed in Spanish, coming back and relearning English,
Mm-hmm.
and then your level of focus, like, you know what, I'm not about to be made fun of. I'm gonna get this work. I'm gonna read all these books. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
That's powerful. So you grew your vocabulary and then worked in all of these different industries that required different styles of communication.
Yes.
You're a point guard, so there's a level of communication that goes with that. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you listen to any athlete, the language is different.
Yes. Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Whether you're talking football, basketball, whatever, like athletes speak a different language.
Yeah.
So you've got the basketball thing, the sales, pharmaceutical sales. You work in sales now. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
different, each different microcosm. Being a bartender, that's its own microcosm.
Mm-hmm.
Former Navy sailor here. Trust me, I know that whole. You know what I
Nice.
mean? I know the whole culture.
Yes.
Um,
Thank you, by the way, for your service. I'm really appreciative of that.
Sure, sure. And the reason I'm highlighting this, guys, is because as of right now, especially look at both of us, we're persons of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that is prevalent right now is what's called code switching. And I don't know that that's necessarily, this might be a hot take, but I don't know that that's necessarily an issue per se. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's simply knowing that there are subcultures, like period, like
Yeah.
each area that you're operating in has its own language. It's not so much that you're having to put on a mask.
Yeah.
It's simply you're in a different environment. Like
Absolutely.
being in corporate, can we be real? Being in corporate
Yeah.
it's the opposite of who we as people of color are. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously the culture and the language is going to be different. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Yes, it's important for us to broaden their minds to what you
Yes.
said earlier in terms of when you would go back to the hood and kind of you would speak their language, but you would then inject new idioms of thought so that their
Mm-hmm.
mind can blossom. That was the
I
phrase you
would do
used.
that vice versa too in the corporate world.
Exactly. So
Teaching them
yeah,
about cultural things. Yeah, yeah.
it's our responsibility to broaden people's perspective, but I wouldn't recommend people look at it as code switching, like wearing a mask or being fake or anything like that. No, like each each realm has its own subculture. Each subculture has its own language, its own level of communication. So it's incumbent upon all of us to be able to communicate effectively, like become more effective communicators. Even if reading is not your thing,
Mm-hmm.
we got audiobooks, y'all. Like
Yeah.
there's no
Absolutely.
there's nothing stopping you. You know what I mean? listen to some audiobooks. And if a word catches you, you're like, whoa, that's fire. Jot it down. Jot
That
it
right
down.
there, that is such
Yeah.
a big thing right there. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Jot it down and look it up. Look it up and do the exercise that I did as a kid. I told Chris this, and I'm sharing this with you guys because not all of you have heard it. But I came up from Jamaica. My family, all of us came up from Jamaica, and I was 6. I was in first grade, but because the education system in Jamaica is based on the British system, we were a little more accelerated cognitively than
Mhm.
the American students. And so when my brother and I would bring home our homework, my parents were like, "No, we're gonna have to supplement this." And they literally did exactly what I'm sharing with you guys. They had us use marble, them old school marble composition books, the black and white me
The black
composition
and
books.
white books, you gotta love those, right?
You know what I mean? And they literally opened up the dictionary, starting from A, and like verbatim just went straight down the letter A and like all the way down the page, wrote the letters, wrote the words out, and then gave us 3 lines.
Mm,
On the first line, you write the meaning verbatim. Similar to what I just said. If you're listening to an audiobook and you hear a word that catches your attention, you think it's fire, write the word out.
mm,
Write the meaning verbatim. That's line 1. Line 2, write the meaning in your own words. Paraphrase it. Like don't just you parroted it on the first line. Now paraphrase it in your own words to prove that you understand what it means. And then
mm.
the third line to really prove you understand what it means, use the word in a sentence. That was what we were doing as kids. And to this day,
That's some great information right there. For all you listening, make sure you write that down. She just gave you guys a golden nugget right there.
yeah. And to this day, my brother and I are great communicators. You know what I mean? And for the same reason that you chose to do when you came back to the US, you were like, I'm not trying to get laughed at when I read. Let me make sure I read these books and expand my vocab. Same thing. I did the same thing because I would be in school and see these kids get laughed at, bruh. Because of what I did, I was always the one raising my hand to read because I didn't realize it at the time, but now that I'm thinking about it, it was that. Like I didn't want any of the other kids to get laughed at. That's number one. But
Mm,
number two, as the bookworm, I always wanted more opportunities to read. I was
yeah.
like, great,
This is my
it's
time to
comprehension.
shine. Yep. Yeah,
You know
there
what I
you go. Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Right? Like, let me read.
yeah. Yeah,
So, for those of you, if communication is your thing, if that's the one thing that you're procrastinating on, take this. You know what I mean? Run this part back, listen to it at half speed,
yeah.
write your notes down. You know what I mean? Like Chris and I are sharing with you, the only cheat codes you need to
Yeah,
be a
and
more effective
I think it also
communicator.
it just spills into so many parts of life. How
Mm-hmm.
many of us, I mean, something I struggle with too, emotional relationships, from
Mm.
personal to friendships to nurturing these relationships, which is something I learned as I started to grow emotionally, right? I would always like look back and realize if I just knew how to express myself, if I
Yep.
just knew to muster up the right words to say what I was trying to say, because it blurted out in a completely different way.
That part.
Right. So that there's just so many ways where effective communication can just help you in just in any which way you could think of. Honestly, if you can just truly figure out what it is you're trying to say, exactly how you're trying to say it. Because I'm sure we've all been there where we've had a conversation, had a deep hearted conversation, maybe an argument, whatever the case may be. You leave like, and in your head, you say something, you're like, why didn't I say that? Why did I leave that out? I can't now go back because it doesn't have the same pun. And over time, those things started to come to me. I started to slow down when I would speak. I started to really figure out. I started to tell myself, like, you know what? Wait a minute. Let me call you right back. Give me a minute. Give me two
Ooh,
seconds. Let
very
me
important.
let me get my thoughts together because a lot of times our emotions will also block out what we're feeling.
That
So
part.
for anyone that's finding themselves struggling with emotionally communicating, it can so much more affect. It can really affect you in that way as well, too, positively, for sure. Just learning, just how to. Let me just get better at doing this because with
Yeah.
anybody, no matter where we are, we can continuously grow. Like we spoke about this yesterday. Everything in this world is meant to evolve from grass. What makes us an exception to the rule, right? I'm still
Right,
trying to grow every day.
right. Yeah. The other point I wanted to touch on, based on Chris's point, is, there's this. I learned this week. I was listening to a, a coach named Liz J. Simpson. She teaches women how to get into the corporate world, how to land corporate clients. And she shared something a mentor of hers shared, which I thought was so amazing and is very appropriate for this conversation. Her mentor told her, masterful communicators understand that they're not only responsible for the words that come out of their mouth, but they're also responsible for how that lands in the lap of the other party.
Mm,
So, to your earlier point about learning the different communication styles and the different environments you've been in, and to what, Chris just said about evolving, the key is to always keep in mind, and even what he talked about with like forgetting stuff, like when you're speaking emotionally, once you take full responsibility of how your words land in the lap of the other party, you'll be a lot more careful about your words. And don't miss the point he made about slowing the conversation down. That is
yes.
a powerful tool to have. Like,
Mm,
make sure you write that down. There's some people that will move very quickly, especially in sales. They
yes.
want to move the conversation quickly because they want to move you to a decision. If
Hmm.
you want to make a clear decision, slow the conversation down and don't feel guilty about doing that.
Yeah.
Like, you're the consumer. If they have to get the sale, technically you're the one that has the leverage in the conversation.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So slow the conversation down. Like, wait, give me a minute, just as Chris said. You know what? Give me a second. Let me call you back. Or, like, I appreciate you bringing up this subject right now. If it's an emotional conversation, like, I appreciate you bringing this up right now, but I can't really talk on it right now.
Hmm.
Give me a day, or you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Like, set a time limit. Don't just procrastinate. Like, don't just put off
Yes.
the
Yes. Let's
conversation.
not do that.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But set a specific time frame. Like, you know what? Give me 24 hours, or give me a couple of days. I got this big project coming up tomorrow. I got to focus and finish that. Let me call you the day after. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, set your limits on even the break, and then come back to the conversation with a fresh head and fresh pair of
Or
eyes.
even just asking a simple question like, "What did you mean by this?" You
Ah,
said all
that.
of that, but this is how we'll slow it down, right? It's something I do in sales.
Yep.
Oh, sometimes I have a customer call in, they want this, they want that, they want this, they want that, and I just let them go off. Okay, good. Then I want to hear everything you have to say. Now, jotted everything. I'm listening intently, right? Which is another form of communication. It's a lot of great speakers that are not good listeners.
Facts.
they just
Facts.
they just want to say what they want to say, and I'm telling this because I was that person once as well. I knew what I wanted to say in my mind, and I was just gonna let you finish. Let me just speak. But you listen intently, and now this is how you'll slow it down, right? What did you mean by this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Let's talk about this. Now we'll move on to this. Okay, good. And then now it becomes a flowy conversation. It becomes something that you want to make sure now we both understand each other. And to your point, slowing down, just slow the conversation down. You feel yourself getting too revved up. You feel yourself getting too excited to say something. The words are just they're just scrambling around. Just take a second. It really is okay. Because in real time, and I've learned this and even watching my own self in video, it's
Mm-hmm.
never as fast as you think it is in your own mind.
That. That.
You think you're moving 1,000 miles an hour, or if you tell somebody like, "Wait, let's slow down a minute," you think you went into crawl stage. But 99.9% of the time, you're actually flowing in the correct way of the conversation. And that's just another little tidbit of communicating. So that was a great point right there. Absolutely. Just slow down and ask effectively.
Yes, that's, and Chris and I were speaking yesterday, and I shared with him the book by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? One of the key tools that Chris shares in there is using that kind of empathetic language, like listen with empathy,
Mm-hmm.
because when a person feels heard, they calm down. Like, it escalates the whole conversation. They calm down. Even if it's a situation where perhaps you're in leadership and you're going to have to do something they don't like,
Mm-hmm.
if you listen to them and they feel heard, and then you proceed with, I understand, I appreciate you. Unfortunately, this is what's, this is the move we're making. Like, as long as you speak and listen with empathy, they'll still go along with you even though they disagree with the decision you're making as the leader. Like, as
Yes.
long as they feel heard, they'll cooperate.
Yeah.
That's number one. That's one of the number one needs that we have as human beings. We have a need for significance, not including food, water, shelter. Like, those are the physical ones. But we have a need to belong, we have a need for significance, and we have a need to feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
Listening and empathy, very key to those things. Very key. So once people feel heard, it's a lot easier. The conversation is a lot easier.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, going back to being an athlete, the best coaches I played for, they were always the toughest ones that would listen to
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
They're always going to give you the and, right? Which is another thing I learned. It's not a but, it's an and,
And mm-hmm.
right? I understand. I feel you.
And
And this is what needs to be done. There's no
yep.
but here because we already established what needs to happen. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. Tell me why you didn't do it, right? And we could figure this out because now it becomes an and thing. We figured this out. We figured that out. Now we could just combine the two and you could receive what it is that I'm trying to give you. Even is,
Right.
I mean, I had those coaches that are like, it's, what are you doing? Da, 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 da. But then we get in the timeout. What happened right there? Oh, okay, you
Mm-hmm.
did this. Okay, cool. I understand. Now listen, next time, do this, this, and that. Cool. All right, get your butt back in the game. Cool.
Love
You
that.
start to take those things with you. Like you can even have heated discussions, right? It's one thing I want people to understand too. There is an art to debating. Now, this is a show I love, which is First Take on ESPN. Comes on every
Mm.
day, 10 a.m. Reason I love this show, not only the way they articulate themselves, again, learning from people that you want to somewhat not mimic, but learn different words from. These
Right.
guys, as you know, if you ever heard barbershop talk, there is nothing like a heated debate when it comes to sports.
Oh, for real.
We'll be jarring at each other. That you think like, do these guys actually even like each other? Like they're arguing about, like they're talking about Michael Jordan and LeBron James. Like what are they even talking about, right? But this show literally showed everyone on a mass scale the difference between arguing and debating. That you can
Mm-hmm.
even be passionately debating. But if you
Right.
choose the right form of words, if you choose to acknowledge what the person said to you as well, right?
Yes.
And be empathetic about that, you can still actually passionately speak your mind and
Right.
feel heard if that's what you felt that moment caused. And that literally can change the difference between a debate and an argument.
Mm-hmm.
These are just little things that just a little simple switch. And what you say, how you say, paying attention to what you're actually saying. And the biggest thing that I wanted to make sure nobody missed was the responsibility.
Was that not a bomb part one? There were a lot of nuggets he and I both dropped in there. So make sure you run this back, take your notes, and put those things into practice, especially if this is very specific to you. If becoming a better communicator is your specific thing that you're procrastinating on, use this episode as your guide. Run it all the way back and take all the notes and start practicing, because this is gonna free you up. Like, this is the tips we share here will free you up, and we would love to hear from you. By all means, DM Chris on Instagram. You can find him at Mr. Trifecta Mindset. Make sure to send him a DM. He will be the one to answer you. He is the one that directly answers all of his messages. And hey, if you have any questions or any updates for me, remember, hashtag get on that. Be sure to hit me up. You can comment below here on YouTube at Getting the Win. Subscribe, hit that bell icon so you get all the notifications. Or if you want to DM me on Instagram, you can find me there at Getting the Win Show. You also find me at Getting the Win Show on Threads and Pinterest. So by all means, reach out to me, reach out to Chris if you have any questions for us, and stay tuned for part 2 next week. In the meantime, have a great rest of your Wednesday and a great rest of your week. piece. And be sure to check out the merch shop. If you are curious about the shirt, you want one for yourself, you can go to gettingthewingear.com. That way you see this shirt, you'll see a bunch of other accessories as well. We've got hoodies, we've got sweats, we've got all the gifts that you could possibly want to buy for yourself and for your folks to get the message out about being as productive as possible and staying true to yourself. Because the mission of this show is to turn procrastinators into producers. That's why I always task you guys to hashtag get on that. Make sure you're on top of your luxury item. And that way you can rock the gear to remind the world that you are all about that luxury item. You are all about getting things done, getting the goals instead of simply setting them.